Hello, Jason. It's Tuesday, May 27th, and it's extremely hot out, but in a bid to try and save the planet by a couple of minutes in the long run, my family hasn't turned on our air conditioning, so you'll excuse the glare off my forehead. The past several days have been extremely exhausting for me. As I'm sure you're aware, the transition from doing pretty much nothing all day to working 8.5 hours a day is going to take its toll. But nonetheless, I already feel myself adapting to this change, and I have a little bit of energy to spare at the end of each shift, so here we go. The first thing I want to do today is introduce you to a book I just bought by reading an opening portion from it. And let me know, just from listening, if you could figure out what it was. Here we go. Prologue. Outer Space. Oh, 'tis for the rebellion a dark time, for though they have the Death Star all destroyed, Imperial troops did from the ashes climb, and push the rebels closer to the void. Across the galaxy, pursued with speed, the rebels flee the Imperial Starfleet vast. Excuse me for a second. A group with Luke Skywalker in the lead hath to the ice world known as Hoth flown fast. Meanwhile, the cruel Darth Vader is obsessed with finding young Skywalker. Thus he hath through every point of space begun his quest, by sending robot probes to aid his wrath. In time so long ago begins our play, in a war-torn galaxy, far, far away. You know what I love about the current cultural climate in which we exist? Things like this, The Empire Striketh Back, a William Shakespeare take on the Star Wars trilogy.
Not unlike Yoda, everybody does.
And yes, people will be right to point out the fact that I said it was the Star Wars trilogy because I still refuse to acknowledge the prequels. Though, if they do come out with Shakespeare versions, I may have to reconsider. But anyway, that's not the book I'm currently reading. In fact, the book I was reading last time I updated you was this one, The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, which I've recently finished. And I've now moved on to a sci-fi classic, although a somewhat confusing one when you learn about its origins, 2001, A Space Odyssey. But more on that in a minute. First, let me tell you about The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. It centers on a character not unsurprisingly named Harold Fry. Moreover, you'll be shocked to find that he goes on an unlikely pilgrimage. In all seriousness, the book is about a character who walks from the south of England to the north of England in order to visit a friend of his from 20 years ago. He hasn't spoken to her or heard from her in any way since she, quite frankly, lost her job in order to save him his, something which he has shame about doing nothing about. And so, as a senior citizen, he finds himself making this epic journey, traveling to see her one last time before she dies of cancer, and he meets some interesting people along the way who help him learn more about who he is and deal with issues from his past. The two issues that come up over and over again are Harold's marriage to his wife Maureen and their relationship with their son David. While the beginnings of Harold's relationship with his wife Maureen are described in quite frankly romantic terms, they quickly become mundane and they sort of fall out of love throughout their history. And due to his relationship with his own parents, Harold is completely unable to make any strong connection to his son, and so his relationship with his son is one that's marked by the same mundaneness. Mundaneness? Mundanity? Mundanitude? Apparently, being an English major isn't enough to make you know every single word in the world, so we're just going to go with mundaneness. While this isn't really the type of book that I would typically get into, I found it rather enjoyable, probably because the majority of the story revolves on one character going on an extremely long walk. And for the most part, I do my best reading while I'm walking, so I felt like his journey and my journey, while his was much longer and more profound, somewhat matched. In terms of literary value, I have to point out that this was a debut novel, and you can really tell that it's a debut novel. The author, Rachel Joyce, somewhat ironically starts to lose track of the fact that the journey is what's important, not the destination. Because she gives her main character several false starts and false endings, which quite frankly chop down the amount of time that he actually spends on his journey. And while the idea of redemption is central to the story, the only thing that really ends up being redeemed is the fact that two people who couldn't stand to be around each other learn, by not being around each other, that they need each other. And so, from a literary perspective, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. But from an entertainment perspective, it was actually a somewhat engaging and interesting story. As you're well aware, I would never describe myself as religious, and the book's main character doesn't either, but nonetheless, his journey is described in religious terms. The very title suggests a religious connotation, a pilgrimage. There's a plane going overhead. But nonetheless, throughout the book, there's this strong sense of purpose and drive behind the character to do something which, quite frankly, is medically impossible. And so by the end of the book, you're left in that bizarre middle ground between religiousness and spirituality, which says that there are some things which we just don't need to understand in order to appreciate. And especially near the end of the book, I became really interested in finishing Harold's journey, and so for entertainment, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. And so now, like I said, I started reading 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I just passed the halfway mark. But first, onto a misconception I had. I was fully under the impression that the book inspired the movie. After all, it was written by Arthur C. Clarke, a well-known science fiction author, and so reason points to the fact that the book must have existed first. But then I opened the book up and it said the novel based on the screenplay by Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, so sure enough, I looked it up and the screenplay came first. But, as it turns out, Arthur C. Clarke wrote the book alongside the screenplay for the movie, and so they were conceived as one idea. It's just the book was released after the movie was. So I plan to finish the book and then rewatch the movie, and I'll let you know what I thought of them after I've done that. And now, on to Battleship. Your last shot was a hit, and you sunk nothing. It was, in fact, my aircraft carrier, so your next moves will be interesting to me, to see what your strategy is like. And I'm going to continue to expand my search by attacking G8.